People say land doesn't belong to anyone, that we're just caretakers until time takes it back. My father never believed that. He said the land knows who loves it, and it never forgets who betrays it. I grew up believing him, waking up before dawn to milk the cows, fix fences, and work beside him on the same soil his father had once plowed. We didn't have much, but what we had was ours. 40 acres of hard-earned earth in Hollow Creek Valley. After he passed, I took over, determined to keep it alive, even though the debts were already eating me alive. I was young, alone, and too proud to ask for help. That's when Richard Dalton showed up. My neighbor, a man who smiled like he'd never known a bad day. He ran a big operation, cattle, equipment, contracts, and everyone in town called him successful. But my father never trusted him, said he had city eyes, the kind that look at everything and see a price tag. The first time Dalton came over after the funeral, he brought a bottle of whiskey and a handshake that lingered too long. He said things like, "You've got a good thing here, and your dad was a legend." But his eyes wandered over the land like he was already measuring it. I didn't think much of it then. Grief makes you slow. The next few months, he made himself a regular presence, helping patch up the barn roof, lending equipment, offering friendly advice about running the farm. I told myself it was neighborly kindness, but he was just waiting for the right moment. One afternoon, he came over with a folder of papers, said it was for a shared irrigation maintenance agreement, something about saving costs, combining water lines between our properties. He talked smooth, fast, like he was doing me a favor. I remember my head pounding that day, too tired to think, too trusting to read the fine print. I signed. He smiled. He even brought pie that night, said his wife made it. I thought nothing of it. Then, a month later, the letter came from the county clerk's office. Half my land now legally belonged to Richard Dalton. My father's land, the land I'd promised I'd never let go. I remember sitting on the porch, holding that letter, staring across the fields as his truck started showing up with new signs. Dalton Acres, future site of Hollow Creek Estates. He hadn't even waited. His workers tore down the fence that separated our properties the same day. He waved at me from his new tractor, shouted something like, "Progress always hurts, doesn't it?" I didn't wave back. I didn't shout. I just stood there, numb, watching the fields I grew up in get chewed apart by machines. I went to court, but I didn't have the money for lawyers, and his documents were airtight. The judge called it a legitimate transfer. I called it theft. When they came to evict me, I didn't fight. I packed what I could into my truck, my father's old rifle, a few photos, and the dirt-caked boots he'd left by the door. Before I left, I walked to the edge of the property, knelt down, and pressed my hand to the ground. It felt warm, alive, like it was listening. I whispered, "I'll be back." Then I stood, looked over at Dalton's house, and watched him standing on his new porch, drink in hand, like a king surveying a stolen kingdom. He smiled that same fake smile, the one that used to mean neighbor, but now meant victor. I memorized it, burned it into my mind, because in that moment, something inside me hardened. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I just promised myself that one day he'd look at this land the same way I did, not with pride, but with regret. I didn't know how, yet, or when, but I knew one thing: revenge wouldn't come from anger. It would come from patience, from understanding the land the way he never could. I drove away that night, the headlight slicing through the fog, the fields fading behind me. But as I left, I swore I could still feel the ground pulsing beneath me, like the land itself was whispering back, "I'll wait with you." Revenge doesn't start with rage, it starts with silence. The kind of silence that crawls under your skin and teaches you how to wait. That year away from Hollow Creek, I learned patience like a religion. I worked days at a repair shop 2 towns over, fixing engines and saving cash in a coffee tin under my bed. Nobody there knew who I was or what I'd lost, and I liked it that way. Every night when I lay in that small apartment with peeling paint and the smell of gasoline on my hands, I'd picture my father's land, the old oak near the barn, the dirt road that curved by the creek, the fence line where he used to hang his hat at dusk. Then I'd picture Dalton standing there instead, smiling in front of it like he built it. That image was enough to keep me going. One night after work, I was sitting in a diner, nursing a cup of coffee, when I overheard 2 farmers talking about Dalton's big expansion. He was planning to turn part of my father's land into housing lots, Dalton Estates, they called it. The irony made me sick. That's when I realized I didn't need to hit him fast, I needed to make him fall slow. So slow he wouldn't even see it happening. I knew that land better than anyone, every rock, every drain line, every weakness. So I started planning. For months, I studied public records, water flow reports, county maps. Dalton was careless, too busy showing off to pay attention to details. He built new irrigation systems, fancy ones with sensors and pumps, but they still ran through the old drainage pipes my father had laid decades ago. That was my opening. In late autumn, I finally drove back. The valley looked the same, calm, innocent, unaware of the storm I was bringing with me. I parked near the ridge at midnight, cut the engine, and sat for a while, just listening. The wind carried that familiar scent of wet earth and diesel, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. I put on my gloves, grabbed my tools, and walked down toward the old creek bed. He had fenced off the area, but I knew where the weak spots were. I'd built half of them with my father. The new pump station gleamed under the moonlight. It was clean, expensive, and vulnerable. I loosened one of the lower pressure valves, just enough to cause an underground leak that wouldn't show up right away. When the rain came, it would flood the lower half of his field from beneath. I didn't take anything, I didn't break anything, I just changed the way nature flowed, shifted the balance. It would take weeks before he noticed. That's how real revenge works, quiet, invisible. I went back to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and waited for dawn. Watching his farmhouse lights flicker in the distance gave me a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. The first time I heard him complain was in the paper. Minor flooding issues delayed Dalton Estates project. The next month, cattle sickness linked to water contamination. That one wasn't me, but I didn't mind letting the rumors work in my favor. I kept feeding the fire. Sent anonymous reports to the county about hazardous waste near his creek, called a few of his investors pretending to be a local official, warning them of pending fines. One by one, his partnerships started falling apart. His workers quit. His wife left, taking the kids in the new car. He started drinking heavier. You could see it in his face whenever he appeared in town. Red eyes, swollen hands, the smile gone. The man who once walked like a king now stumbled like a ghost. Everyone said he was cursed, that bad luck followed him. I knew better. The land wasn't cursing him, it was correcting him. Every storm, every crack in his foundation, every bad harvest, they were all reminders that he didn't belong there. Sometimes I'd drive out at night and park just far enough to see the lights in his windows. He'd pace back and forth, shoulders slumped, a bottle in his hand. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity either. What I felt was balance. And yet, deep down, I knew it wasn't over, because Dalton still had one thing left: his pride. And pride takes longer to kill than anything else. By the time winter rolled around, Dalton wasn't a man anymore. He was a warning. I'd hear things about him whenever I went into town, stories whispered by the same people who once called him the pride of Hollow Creek. They said he barely left the house, that he'd stopped showing up to council meetings, that he'd fired the last of his workers after accusing them of spying. Someone mentioned he'd been seen shouting at the fence line, cursing at the wind like it was out to get him. I didn't laugh. I just listened. I knew what he was feeling: the slow unraveling of control, the paranoia that eats your mind when everything you built starts turning against you. I knew because I'd been there once, too. The difference was I learned to live with the silence. He never could. His farm was falling apart, not from any single act, but from a dozen small wounds that kept reopening. The underground flooding had ruined the soil, the investors were gone, and the bank had started circling like vultures. The land that once made him powerful was now bleeding him dry. Every time I drove past Hollow Creek, I'd glance at that big white farmhouse sitting in the middle of decay and think, this is what theft costs. But revenge, even slow and careful, doesn't end until you see the moment of collapse, until you look into the eyes of the man who took everything and realize he finally understands what he did. So, one night, I decided to see him. It was late, the kind of late where the air feels heavier and the whole valley hums with storm warnings. Rain started to fall, thick and cold. I parked at the ridge, engine off, lights out. The house below was dim except for one room, his office, the one with the big glass window facing the fields. I could see him moving inside, pacing, drinking, stopping to look out like he expected someone. I stepped out of the truck, the mud soft under my boots, and started walking. The storm built fast, wind screaming through the trees, rain slicing down in silver lines. By the time I reached his fence, thunder cracked so loud it shook my ribs. He must have seen me because the next moment the front door burst open. He came out with a flashlight, beam trembling across the yard until it landed on me. "You!" he said, voice slurred but sharp. "I knew it! You've been doing this to me!" He staggered down the porch steps, rain plastering his hair to his face. I didn't answer. I just stood there, watching him, the same way I had the day he stole my land, calm, quiet, letting the silence speak. "You think you're smarter than me?" he shouted. "You think you can ruin me and just walk away?" His laugh was hollow, more pain than pride. "This land is mine!" he screamed. "You hear me? Mine!" I stepped closer, just enough for him to see my eyes. "No, Richard," I said, my voice barely above the rain. "It never was." He lunged at me, lost his footing, and slipped on the wet boards of his porch. It happened fast. One swing, one fall, and one crack of skull against the railing. The sound cut through the storm like a gunshot. I froze. For a second I thought he'd get back up. But he didn't move. The flashlight rolled down the steps, beam spinning across the ground before settling on the mud. I stood there, soaked, heart pounding, watching the man who'd taken everything from me finally become still. I didn't run. I didn't call for help. The storm was doing its work, washing away footprints, muting the world in rain. After a while, I turned and walked back to my truck. By morning, the valley was quiet again. The sheriff's report said Dalton died in an accident. Fell during the storm, broke his neck. No one questioned it. No one looked too close. The land went up for auction 6 months later, but no one bid. They said nothing grew there anymore. I waited patient as always, until the bank was desperate enough to sell cheap. I bought it under another name, in cash, one deed at a time. It took years to rebuild. I fixed the fences, drained the soil, repaired what the storm and time had broken. The first year, nothing grew. The second year, a little grass returned. By the third, wildflowers bloomed near the creek again. The land had forgiven me, or maybe it had just been waiting for the right hands. Sometimes I stand at the edge of the field at dusk, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, and I swear I can still hear my father's voice. The land remembers who tends it. He was right, because even now when the wind runs through the tall grass, I can feel it whispering. Not with anger, not with sorrow, but with peace. The kind of peace you only earn after you've taken back what was yours all along.